The glass walls of Ardent Global's executive boardroom caught the late morning sun and bent it into sharp, blinding angles that danced across the polished table. Everything about the room had been designed to intimidate without saying a word. The height, the silence, the way the city far below looked small and conquerable. Eleanor. Whitmore stood at the head of the table with her tablet tucked against her arm, her posture straight, her jaw set in the way that had become legendary inside the company. At 39, she was one of the youngest CEOs in the sector, and she had learned early that hesitation invited attack. When the board members filed in, suits rustling, eyes alert, she nodded once efficiently, already moving through the agenda in her head. The final item, the one that had caused a low, persistent hum of gossip all week, was scheduled for the end. A meeting with an investor who had requested a personal introduction before committing to a substantial position in Ardent Global. When the door opened again, Eleanor barely glanced up at first. She assumed another assistant, perhaps late, perhaps nervous. Instead, an old man stepped inside with slow, deliberate movements, leaning lightly on a cane that looked more symbolic than necessary. His suit was impeccably tailored but unfashionably classic, the kind that refused to chase trends. His hair was silver, cropped close, and his face bore the lines of someone who had smiled, often and frowned only when it mattered. Behind him, a junior associate whispered his name as if invoking something dangerous or sacred. "Mr. Isaiah Coleman," the associate said, voice tight with awe. Eleanor felt a flicker of irritation at the theatrics. She had reviewed the file, of course. She knew the numbers, the shell companies, the quiet influence that rippled through markets when this man moved his money. What she had not expected, and what she did not like admitting even to herself, was the surge of assumptions that rose uninvited the moment she saw him. Isaiah Coleman crossed the room with unhurried confidence and stopped. A few feet from Eleanor, he studied her with calm, assessing eyes that did not rush, that did not bow. Then he extended his hand. It was a simple gesture, ordinary in 100 boardrooms every day, yet something in Eleanor stiffened. In that fraction of a second, her mind raced through a mess of half-formed judgments she had never bothered to challenge, because success had always validated her instincts. She thought of the stories she had heard, the coded warnings, the discomfort of being seen by someone who had survived systems she had only benefited from. She told herself she was being cautious, professional, that respect did not require physical contact. So she smiled, tight and controlled, and instead of taking his hand, she gestured toward the table. "Please have a seat, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was heavy. Board members shifted. Someone coughed. Isaiah's hand remained extended for a heartbeat longer, then he withdrew it slowly. He did not look offended, at least not in any obvious way. He nodded once, his expression unreadable, and took the offered seat. The meeting proceeded. Numbers projected, strategies explained, Eleanor commanding the room as she always did. Yet an unease crept under her words. She felt watched, measured, not just by Isaiah, but by the room itself, as if something unspoken had been recorded and stored away. Isaiah asked few questions, but when he did, they cut cleanly to the core of Ardent Global's operations, exposing strengths Eleanor was proud of and weaknesses she had hoped to bury under future projections. By the time the meeting ended, he thanked her politely, rose with the help of his cane, and left without another glance. The door closed behind him with a soft finality that made Eleanor's chest tighten for reasons she refused to examine. That afternoon, Eleanor brushed off the incident. She told herself it was nothing, that investors came and went, that respect was measured in returns, not rituals, but whispers followed her through the corridors. A board member lingered to ask whether she had known Isaiah's background beyond the financials. An assistant forwarded an article she had somehow missed, detailing Isaiah Coleman's role in building minority-owned venture funds that had quietly propped up entire industries during downturns. At home that night, Eleanor poured herself a drink and stared at the city lights, replaying the moment in her mind. She told herself she would do nothing differently. Still, sleep came late and thin, broken by the memory of a hand she had refused, floating between them like an unanswered question. By morning, the consequences arrived with ruthless efficiency. Eleanor walked into her office to find her inbox flooded. A major partner had postponed a joint announcement. Another had requested clarification on recent developments. Most alarming was a brief, impeccably worded message from Isaiah Coleman's firm stating that, after careful consideration, they would not be proceeding with the planned investment and would be reallocating their capital. No explanation, no invitation to discuss, just a closed door. The market reacted quickly. Ardent Global's stock dipped, not catastrophically, but enough to trigger concern. Eleanor called emergency meetings, barked orders, demanded damage control. Yet beneath the flurry of activity, a cold understanding began to take shape. This was not about spreadsheets. This was about something she had dismissed as insignificant, and it was unraveling faster than she could command it to stop. By noon, Eleanor's confidence had fractured into sharp, jagged edges. She sat alone in the boardroom, the same sun now glaring rather than gleaming, and stared at the empty chair where Isaiah Coleman had sat the day before. The power she had always wielded so effortlessly felt suddenly conditional, fragile. She reviewed reports showing how deeply Isaiah's network reached. How many partners trusted his judgment not because he was loud, but because he was careful, because he had a reputation for integrity, forged in decades of being underestimated and outmaneuvered. The realization burned. She had not just insulted a man. She had signaled something about herself, about the culture she represented, and the market had listened. Against the advice of her legal team, Eleanor requested a meeting. Not through assistants, not through intermediaries, but directly. The reply came hours later with an address and a time, no pleasantries attached. Isaiah Coleman's office was nothing. Like Ardent Global's, it was housed in a renovated brownstone, warm wood and soft light replacing glass and steel. Books lined the walls, not for display but for use, their spines worn. Eleanor felt out of place the moment she stepped inside. Her heels too sharp against the old floorboards. Isaiah greeted her himself, leaning on his cane, his expression neutral. This time, when he extended his hand, she hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of the moment fully, then took it. His grip was firm, steady. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, the words carrying more urgency than she liked. They sat across from each other, no table between them, just two chairs in the quiet. Eleanor began with the language she knew best, apologies framed as explanations, missteps softened by intent. Isaiah listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, the silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but resonant. He did not accuse. He did not raise his voice. He told her about the first time a banker had refused to meet his eyes, about the deals lost, not because the numbers were wrong, but because his presence made people uncomfortable. He spoke of learning which battles to fight, of understanding that power often revealed itself in the smallest gestures. "You did not owe me a handshake," he said simply. "But you showed me how you see the world, and I had to decide whether I wanted my money to live there." Eleanor felt something inside her collapse, not dramatically, but decisively. For the first time, her success offered no shield. She leaned forward, her composure gone, and asked what she could do. The word begged hovered between them, unspoken but undeniable. Isaiah studied her for a long moment, then told her that money could always be replaced, but trust required work. He did not promise to reverse his decision. He did not even hint at it. Instead, he challenged her to look beyond metrics, to examine the culture she enforced with her silence as much as with her commands. "If you want to lead," he said, "learn to see people before you see positions." Eleanor left the brownstone shaken and changed in ways she could not yet articulate. The following weeks were brutal. The stock wavered. The board pushed back. Yet she persisted, initiating changes that felt risky, uncomfortable. She listened more. She invited voices that had been missing. Some called it performative. Others resisted outright. Eleanor absorbed it all, driven not by optics but by the memory of a quiet room and a man who had mirrored her own power, back to her without hostility. Months later, when Isaiah Coleman's firm announced a modest investment in Ardent Global, the news barely caused a ripple compared to what Eleanor felt when she received his note. It was brief, handwritten. "Progress," it read, "is not loud." Eleanor kept the note in her desk. She knew the story people told would simplify everything, turn it into a neat lesson with a satisfying ending. But she understood now that there was no ending, only an ongoing reckoning. Power, she had learned, was not proven by who bowed to you, but by who you were willing to meet at eye level. And sometimes the moment you refuse a hand is the moment you begin to lose everything you thought you owned.